Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Just wanted to say you're in the right place if you're here for the 2023 Disaster Supplemental Q&A. We'll wait till 3 o'clock and then get started probably right at 3. So long as I have my EDA folks with me. So I'll hop back on in just a minute and we can start with some introductions. But for the moment, sit tight. Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? I hope you're all having a good afternoon or morning, depending on your time zone. Welcome in. Glad to have you here, and thanks for going through the registration process to be with us. I will get started in just a minute here. Give it till 3 so people can hop in if they were moving from another meeting or something like that. Just a flag for everyone, the meeting is being recorded. We can then post this and hopefully maybe a transcript of maybe the answers to some of the questions to our website after we go through this process. So I hope that's okay with everyone. Everybody should be set to cameras off except for the EDA folks I have on the line with me. You do have a microphone capability, so you can unmute, although I would please ask to stay on mute unless you're asking a question or if we're directing you to take your mics off. So just a few house cleaning items up front. I will get started here, so welcome. My name is Riley O'Leary. I'm an economic development specialist, or now I'm a policy analyst with the EDA. I've been with EDA for about 3 years now. Came from the Seattle regional office and moved out here to headquarters to help with some policy stuff up here. So today we are going to basically just open up questions for you all. I do have a couple things up front before we get started. Number one is that this is a follow-up to a recording session that we did back about a week or about 2 weeks ago. It is posted to our EDA website and covers some of the basics of the 2023 disaster NOFO. As well as has some highlights from a couple of our regional directors and goes over a couple of project examples and common questions like that. I will post the link to that in the chat once I get a moment, as well as our EDA contact page. First, what we're going to do, I'm gonna launch a poll. It's optional if you don't want to participate, that's fine, but it's just a way for us to gauge kind of who's in the audience and what the needs are of the participants. So while I launch that poll, I'll turn it over to my EDA colleagues to introduce themselves. We have Robin, Naomi, and Alex. I'll start the poll, and then maybe Naomi, you can kick it off with an intro. All right, the poll should be live, and you can cycle through the questions at your own leisure, and then I'll be able to share the results afterwards.
Thank you, Riley, and thank you everyone for joining today. I am Naomi Friedman. I also work out of EDA headquarters, and I am the National Coordinator for Disaster Recovery and Resilience, and very glad to be with you today.
Great. Alex?
Hey, thanks, Riley. Alex Smith. I'm an economic development representative out of the Denver EDA regional office. I cover 2 states of my territory, South Dakota and Iowa, and last disaster supplemental we had was in 2019. Had a wide variety of projects through that, and happy to kind of discuss some of those examples and more on this opportunity as well. Thanks.
Great. And Robin?
Robin Cooley. I'm with part of the Atlanta Regional Office, and I'm the economic development representative for the state of South Carolina. I've also covered North Carolina as well. And like Alex, we've had multiple natural disaster events here, and I can speak to other, examples of projects and things that we've done in the past under disaster supplements as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the introduction. Just a reminder to have people go on mute if you're not speaking. I might end up taking a little control and muting you if I hear some feedback, but no, it's not personal. I am going to just go over a couple of light background things just to kind of refresh what we talked about in the past session. And then we have a couple of prepped questions just to get the conversation rolling. But from there, we will just open it up to Q&A. I am going to let the poll keep going for a little bit just to generate some more responses, and I can highlight those results maybe once I'm done with this session here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just to give everyone a brief overview of EDA and what we do, we're an economic development administration, and we lead the federal government in economic development. We do this in a variety of ways. We have a number of different programs that you can check out on our website, but it's all about supporting growth, innovation, and competitiveness all across the country. We cover all 50 states and 9 territories, so we have a lot of coverage. We do this also through specific investment strategies. We have investment priorities that we try to hit, and you can check those out on our website as well. But we do this through strategy grants and also through implementation. So planning and strategy, and then there's implementation where you're actually doing projects, construction, non-construction, etc. Those can include things, the non-construction could include things like technical assistance. I mentioned the infrastructure, and part of that is disaster recovery. So EDA does play a pretty big role in disaster recovery, mostly through the economic resilience component of responding to and preparing for disasters that impact communities in our country. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So Alex mentioned in 2019, that was the last time we got a disaster supplemental. We got some supplementals for CARES, COVID, and then 2023 is the first year we've had this disaster supplemental come back. So it has been announced the NOFO is open and we are accepting applications. A quick note on that is that we are now accepting applications in our new system Edge.
Do you want me to try to
There
call?
is someone on mute.
No, I'm gonna give her this.
And we will cover the new system a little bit. So if you have questions about that, feel free to keep those prepped for the question section. Just a small highlight on the actual NOFO itself. I mentioned it was $500 million. There's about 17 million for salaries and expenses, so 483 million for grants. Generally, we expect grant rates to be at an 80% EDA funded to 20% match. So that means you as an applicant would be responsible for providing 20% of the funding as match. There are ways that can vary. For example, if you're a federally recognized tribe, that grant rate can go up to 100%. Also in circumstances where the disaster or the economic circumstances of the region are much more severe than the rest of the nation. As part of the funding, we support infrastructure and long-term economic recovery projects. And then in terms of eligibility, just basics, there's a lot of details in the NOFO. We have our regular eligibility criteria and entities. As you can see on the right, there's district planning organizations, federally recognized tribes, state and local governments. That includes political subdivisions like school boards and stuff, institutions of higher education, public and private nonprofits, but it does not include for-profit entities or individuals. In addition to that entity type, there's a location component to the eligibility for disaster supplemental funding, and that is that your project must be located in or substantially benefit an area that was impacted by a major natural disaster in calendar years 2021 and 2022. There is more detail in the other presentation we had and in the NOFO, so you can always check that out for more info. This is just a quick breakdown of the regions of EDA. So there's 6 regions plus the headquarters component, and the regions were allocated a specific dollar amount. The Atlanta should be 160 million, not 160. But just so you can check out which region you would be in contact with, and kind of the amount of funding available for this particular NOFO in your region. I did want to highlight the link at the bottom, and it would be a good time for me to drop that as well in the chat. So let me do that. The best way to get started is to contact your EDR, and you can find out who your EDR is on our website. We have generally 1 EDR per state. There's some circumstances where that varies, but you can always go there to head to start the conversation with your economic development representative. The next thing I wanted to show is a relatively updated map of the areas that are eligible. This does change based on some of the disaster declarations getting updated, but for the most part, this should be pretty accurate. The pink highlights where a disaster declaration in calendar years 2021 or 2022 happened. Anything that's gray is not a declared area, so not eligible under this NOFO. If you do need to check, you can go to the FEMA website and look for your particular county or area. and see if a disaster covers that. The FEMA website's really great for this. Just make sure to click major disaster. And I think we highlight that in the questions as well. The last slide that I want to talk about is just some of the key updates to this NOFO from past disaster NOFOs. So the 2023 disaster NOFO changed a little bit of the language around what resilience is. We've emphasized it more and basically just clarified some of the language on what we expect when it comes to meeting resilience as part of your projects. So EDA does expect every project it funds under this NOFO to be resilient to future disruptions to the greatest extent possible, including the impacts of climate change, and we can dive into that more. Equity is also a component of the NOFO that wasn't in the past. We expect projects to advance equity to underserved populations to the extent possible. And for the definition of underserved populations, you can check out our website. We have a pretty good definition of underserved populations under our equity strategic investment priority. And then the last thing to note is that we're expanding into workforce development projects a little bit more than we had in the past. And so there's some more guidance around what workforce development projects should look like. And there's specific DOC principles that you should be including in your proposal if your proposal has workforce development components. That is all I wanted to cover on this brief presentation. I'll let my EDA colleagues fill in anything if I miss something important, and then we can just turn it over to some prep questions. Anything from the three of you? Great. All right, let me maybe actually take a look at the poll, and I think everybody does have the results of the poll available, so you should be able to see this. I'm not sure if I can close this. I'm not as familiar. I guess I don't know how to share the results. You might be able to click up on the top and view poll results, but we can share them at the end since I can't figure it out right now. But let's go ahead and move into the prep questions. I'll ask maybe a couple, and feel free to start typing questions in chat, and I'll monitor the chat. Hopefully I can kind of handle monitoring and then dealing out questions to the panelists. If we can't get something answered during this call, we can always follow up and post it to like an FAQ or our website. So please feel free to go ahead and start doing that. And if there's anything that I need clarification on, I might ask you to come off mute and just go ahead and ask.
Hey, Riley,
So,
yeah, if I go up top on Teams to the polls tab, I can see the results of the poll. So I imagine
excellent.
for most attendees, it's the same.
Thank you so much. That's helpful. Thank you. All right, so question one, and I'll let any one of you answer this. How do I use the FEMA site to determine if my project is a county that has received a disaster declaration?
I could take that one if you like. I am putting the FEMA website right now. That basically is a searchable, interactive web page. And you will notice that you can type in your state, territory, tribe. You will also need to indicate that this is a major disaster declaration. So for example, there are also emergency declarations, but we are talking about post-disaster, major disaster declarations. So on the drop-down menu, you're going to want to specify that. And we're also looking at specific years. We're looking at calendar year 2021 and 2022. So I want to mention something, which is there may be a disaster that began at the end of 2022 and sometimes even continued into 23, where the declaration may have been declared even in 2023. If the incident began in 2022, and you can see that on the website because it will say incident begin date, it would qualify. If it is a disaster that occurred only in 2023, it would not qualify. One thing to keep in mind is there could be a location that has a qualifying disaster from 2021 or 2022, but got hit again in a 2023. And it's okay to mention that second disaster in your application, as long as you have the qualifying disaster highlighted. It is okay to tie in impacts and discuss resilience issues as it might also relate to some of the future stresses that this location has experienced.
Great, thank you. And if anybody has follow-up questions, feel free to type these in the chat. So there's a lot of federal funding out there. There's different sources of funding, whether it's state or local or federal, but you know, there's HUD, CDBG grants, FEMA, USDA, or SBA. So Robin, if someone is receiving one of these federal funds, can they also apply for EDA funding, and what should they consider with that?
Okay, so, I mean, technically, you can have other funds in addition to having the EDA funds, and they can be separate projects, of course. You know, if as far as match, you know, you can only match federal funds to other federal funds if strictly authorized by statute, and then our interpretation of that statute. So you would have to talk to your economic development representative about the specific issues, you know, related, the specific scope of your project and what you want to accomplish, whether any of that other federal funding is going to be part of the scope that you're proposing in your application. If and how they might work together, may or may not be able to work together or to be leveraged in the same project. You know, in order to see how that works, may or may not work together. So there are going to be nuances to each of those things depending upon your project and how you're proposing to potentially incorporate those other funds, and or you may or may not be able to do that.
Great, thanks. So we have a question here. Are nonprofit organizations who provide economic development, workforce development, programming to vulnerable communities eligible to apply? And also in terms of budgetary requirements, will it require a financial audit review with the budget? Alex, are you able to take that one? I can take it if maybe you missed the question.
Yeah, I was getting distracted here. I'll let you finish that one.
Okay, sure. So yes, nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply. However, you still must match or meet that geographic component for eligibility. So you need to make sure that the project where you're providing workforce development is located in an area that had a major disaster declaration for calendar years 2021 and 2022. Let me jump to a prep question here, and then I can answer some of the ones in chat as well. So Alex, what are EDA's investment priorities, and how would an applicant demonstrate that their project meets them?
I am ready for this one. There's 7 investment priorities, and I just dropped a link in the chat here to all 7 of those. Also, when you are filling out an application, there's a link actually in the application form that directs you to these as well. So there's 7 investment priorities. I'll list them off real quick: equity, recovery and resilience, workforce development, manufacturing, technology-based economic development, environmentally sustainable development, exports, and foreign direct investment. So I encourage applicants, reach out to your economic development representative. Obviously, most projects that are applying for disaster recovery projects are going to meet a recovery and resilience investment priority, but it's also important to note if there's other investment priorities being met, they can talk you through and advise you on best practices on how to include this in your application.
Great, thank you. And there's a question here, Robin, I'm wondering maybe if you can answer, is it super strict that projects for the FY23 disaster NOFO be related to the disaster from which the project derives its eligibility? So in order, I don't know if that makes sense, but
I think so. I mean,
the
we're
nexus.
the nexus. I mean, it's not specifically that, okay, the storm came through and it destroyed this specific water line or wiped out this specific road, and you have to only replace that specific item. You know, we are looking at helping a community in an eligible area recover from the economic impacts of the disaster. And certainly you would typically discuss in your application, you know, the storm came, it did X, it did Y, you know, rain, flooding, tornadoes, whatever it was, it caused these impacts. And the project will help make your community more resilient for the next event through X, Y, and Z, maybe helping you diversify the economy, bring in different jobs, harden your infrastructure, things of that nature. So it's not as direct as it wiped out this line, I'm going to replace this exact piece of line.
Excellent, thank you. Naomi, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna add exactly that, which is in our previous disaster supplementals, our 2018 and our 2019, there was a specific requirement for Nexus. I think we might have even required like a specific page, including lots of detail. That is not included in the same way this time around, because as Robin said, we're looking for really a holistic approach to disaster recovery, disaster resilience, and economic resilience. We're not just looking at repairing damaged structures that exactly happened from that storm, but there should be a relationship. There should definitely be a good relationship between that event and the hazard and the types of activities you're proposing.
Great, thanks. And I'll take this one up above about accessing the application. I did mention earlier, we launched a new grant management portal called Edge. And if you're accessing the NOFO through grants.gov, you can no longer apply through grants.gov. So in the NOFO, there's a link to our Edge portal. You do have to register in Edge to be able to fill out the application. So that's the first step in the process. If you're unable to complete the registration process, I'll put in a link here on how to do that, and then maybe we can follow up with other tech support, but we do have a tech support team for that. The next question down here, while I get some clarification, and maybe Alex, you can help answer this. Is it possible for a statewide organization to apply? And if so, is there any guidance you have on how to align with multiple SEDs? You know, if a statewide project covers multiple SEDs, how can you demonstrate alignment?
Yeah, devil's always in the details, but a state organization obviously eligible, and then it's important to work with the executive directors at those economic development districts to be able to note their comprehensive economic development strategies as part of your project. So recommend reaching out to the executive directors at those EDDs where your project covers. And most of those already have addressed recovery and resiliency. In fact, all of them have. So it's pretty easy, but definitely work with your local economic development representative at EDA, and they can help you align the stars there as well.
Excellent, thank you. And Robin, there's a question here about covering soft costs for construction projects. So construction projects are eligible under this NOFO, but maybe Robin, can you clarify if like project administration or design are eligible costs for disaster projects?
Yes, grant administration, engineering, design, construction management, construction oversight, permitting, those related costs can be eligible. You have to make sure that, as how you acquire those services complies with the federal procurement requirements, so that they can be eligible expenses under the grant, but they could be considered eligible under the grant if you wish to include them.
Awesome, thanks. And Naomi, I see a question here that I think is maybe targeted just for you. If you could elaborate on the disaster recovery and resilience coordinators that are eligible for funding for capacity building measures, who are these coordinators typically employed by? Maybe elaborate on that whole process.
That's a wonderful capacity building activity that EDA does support, which is extra staff capacity to help with disaster recovery and resiliency. That might mean creating a disaster recovery plan, a resiliency plan, helping to identify resources available to help with recovery, delivering training to local governments. In terms of who hosts those coordinators, the host needs to be an eligible applicant. So just like the eligible applicants that Riley described in the beginning, which would be a unit of local government, state government, an economic development district, a university, a nonprofit, the host for those capacity building coordinators needs to be eligible for EDA funding.
Great, thank you. Yeah, please keep the questions coming. Robin, what can you help elaborate? This came up just briefly before, but what is a CEDS and how would an applicant align a project with a CEDS? And if they don't have a CEDS in their region, what should they do?
Okay. The Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS, is an EDA funded planning document. It's typically completed by our designated economic development districts, which are, at least here in the Atlanta region, they go by a number of names: councils of government, regional planning commissions, area development districts, entities such as that who are designated EDDs. I believe you can find that information on our website, who the EDDs are in your communities. And they complete those regional planning documents called CEDS, and we review them and approve them here at EDA. There's a content guideline that we have published out there on the website that helps them, work through what needs to be in that document and what they should cover, and at least the topics of what they should cover. Aligning it with the CEDS, typically you would be able to review that project. You can usually find them on their websites, the EDD websites. You can usually locate those CEDS documents and review them and kind of look through and see how your project is consistent with goals and objectives in that CEDS document and discuss that in your application. You can talk about how it aligns in that way. I'm sorry, Riley, I'm not sure if I've forgot a piece of the question. Did I answer the whole thing?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, I'm not sure if we also covered, if you don't have a CEDS, there's some other options for you. Yeah.
Yeah, in an area where there isn't a CEDS or an approved EDA approved CEDS document, and I encountered this, 15 years ago when I worked in North Carolina, there were places that were not EDDs, and they had other regional documents that they could, point to that were done on a regional level, maybe by their local economic development entities, or things of that nature that they could point to as a kind of a comprehensive strategy that was maybe comparable to, or something that kind of met the spirit of our guidelines for a CEDS, that they could point to and claim that they were consistent with that document in those areas that did not have an a EDA approved SEDS document.
Awesome, thank you. Alex, maybe you can help me with this. Have community foundations or long-term recovery groups received funding through EDA disaster supplemental funding in the past? And I think maybe something you could talk about too is if they're technically eligible, what are the types of projects that a community foundation or long-term recovery group would want to, submit? What are we really looking for? And I'm thinking of job creation and economic development. Maybe you can expound on that.
Yeah, depending on how the community foundations or the long-term recovery groups are organized, if they're like a 501c status or eligible. So first and foremost, need to determine that. EDA in the past has helped out local community foundations. If a local downtown park was ravaged by a flood, for example, and they wanted to, come redevelop the land and work with EDA on infrastructure and look at bringing new employers, that would be an example. They could bring financial match into a project and work in partnership with an economic development organization or economic development district. So we could get you some examples, Cameron, if needed at some point, if you do want to look at past examples. But that's probably kind of what we'd be looking at there.
Yeah, any examples would be awesome. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Yeah, I'll fish up some tech support contact and make sure to share that. I know there has been a few issues, so it's a new system and we're working through it. Thanks for being patient. Naomi, I don't think we've covered this yet, and it would be really good to cover what resilience to future disruptions mean, what that phrase means. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Sure thing. EDA has historically emphasized resilience. So we have historically thought about this is not just about repairing the damage, but it's making us stronger for the future. In this current supplemental NOFO, we've further emphasized that. And we have talked a bit more about future risk. We know that we are seeing more frequent catastrophic disasters. Places that may not have been hit before are now being hit. Places are being hit with more severe disasters. There's less time to recover between disasters. And so it's really important for folks to think about future risk. Excuse me. That could include economic transitions. That could include stressors such as industries moving out of your location. And it also includes climate change and climate resilience. We know that is a complex topic, and the data on that is continually evolving. But we want you to think about, for example, if it's an infrastructure project, we want you to think about the life cycle of that event. And that because of things like sea level rise, increased flooding, we want you to think about how that infrastructure is going to hold up. What is the location in which it is going to be built? What is its capacity? Do we need to consider more rainstorms, so bigger capacity? Do we need to think about green infrastructure in addition to traditional gray infrastructure? So you'll want to just talk about future risks and how you're considering that in the project that you are proposing. And I will say that we also included some tools that might help you think about future risk, both in the NOFO itself and in the previous webinar that was recorded.
Great, thanks. And I'll link that our web page that has the previous recording. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen here just so we can focus on questions and everything. But please feel free to keep them coming. This next one, I'm not exactly sure who best maybe can help me answer this. And Elaine, maybe you could even tell us where your project might be located. But the question is, are you expecting these grants to be very competitive, et cetera, a lot of applicants, maybe what the landscape is like. So I don't know if any of you want to tackle that.
I can try, Riley. I know here in the Atlanta region, it's fairly competitive. We can receive at least twice as many applications as we have funds available. So I know here in the 8 southeastern Atlanta states, it can be fairly competitive. And I assume the other regions, will have interest in it as well. So I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Yeah, I think that really helps. Thank you. I was just wondering, I work with a lot of different nonprofits, and I bet that's going to be the #1 question asked is before applying for a federal grant is what's the likelihood? How competitive is this? So thank you.
Yeah. Let me post that link, and if there are any other questions, feel free to type them in or even raise your hand. You can come off mute here. So. Let's see. How can economies dependent on tourism increase their resilience? I'm not sure if there's an expert here on tourism, but Robin, I see you came off mute. You wanted?
I guess I've had some activity with some of our communities here because in South Carolina we have Myrtle Beach and Charleston and a number of very high tourism areas, and so we've had some of the different projects I've had come in, which are, I'm not saying that these are, the solutions to everything, but we've had some projects come in where maybe communities are looking to, this was even several years ago, I think after the 2015 floods here in South Carolina that were pretty significant and did a whole lot of damage to a lot of areas. One of the communities that's heavily tourism related was looking to boost their advanced manufacturing workforce, and they did have some industries there that needed to expand, and they wanted to be able to draw in more people. So the local technical college got a grant to build a workforce training center to focus on advanced manufacturing to help train the people that were there and encourage more, help attract more people in and kind of help diversify that economy and address different jobs that might be able to come in. I think I've talked to people about doing different kind of planning studies and analyses to try to, look at other opportunities to help diversify their economy, and try to make themselves a little, or maybe make themselves less tourism dependent and kind of look at other factors that they can focus on in their economies, to reduce their reliance on tourism. Just a few really small examples that I've had a few communities over the years that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if Naomi has some better examples or.
Yeah, I mean, I will just add that there are climate factors that were impacting tourism. So, for example, more high heat days might affect tourism. Issues around coastal resilience might affect tourism. We're seeing, issues with lakes that might be receding due to drought, and that might be affecting recreational boating. So I think just acknowledging an awareness of, those changes and considering that in either the effort to diversify the economy or to even shift. Not to disband tourism, efforts, but to acknowledge some of the changes. And to talk about, how the project would take measures to consider some of those shifts. We also fund plans. A location might want to do a plan to consider long-term resilience of their tourism industry. That might be a research component that could be very, very helpful to that particular area down the road. We can also fund vulnerability assessments, long-term planning, tourism master plans, things like that. That might be something that may be of interest.
Yeah, and I would say that the communities I've worked with, they're not looking to give up on tourism, but they are trying to take a look at their other economic assets and what they can do to promote those and grow those, to diversify their economy, to make sure they don't have all their eggs in one basket.
Thanks a lot. That was super helpful.
Excellent. I am not seeing any additional questions in chat. Any last thoughts? I'll give it another minute or two. And is there anything from the panelists that maybe you just wanted to add? I think I'll put another plug in here for contacting your EDR. They are really helpful. Yeah, Alex, I saw you came up mute.
Yeah, I just might mention, workforce development when it comes to disaster recovery and resilience. When you think of like line workers and doing that underground, and training facilities that could withstand hurricane wind, maybe helping out with a training facility. EDA could look at construction of facility or help out with training equipment. Think of that as well, like a workforce development component, as well as resiliency, something I've seen a lot in my region the last couple of years.
Yeah, I know you sort of touched on how projects might that might not fit within EDA's wheelhouse could still be competitive, noting that there's a question about can EDA fund transportation projects, and I'll just kind of highlight again that it's kind of about framing, and there is some devil in the details on is it about job creation and economic development? How do you frame the project in a way that builds economic growth in your region? So that's something you can work on with your EDR. Oh, go ahead, Naomi.
No, Riley, I was just going to say there's a question about transportation projects.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to cover that, or I was kind of mentioning that it is sort of about how you frame projects, to create a job component, job creation component, and sort of what the regional needs are. Is there an average grant request that you've seen from previous applications? Maybe one of the EDRs can give a ballpark, but I don't think we have a specific guideline on that.
That might be a hard one to give, because even prior ballparks might be wrong at this stage, the way construction costs have been. But in our region, I've seen grants for construction requests that might be from the 1 million range up to or $500,000 range up to $5 or $6, $8 million requests, and that's all staying within the 80% or less of the project request. So the request size might be is not necessarily the same thing as the average award size, which I couldn't speak for all of the regions. So the NOFOs used to have that information in kind of average size information. I can't remember if I saw that exactly in this one. The planning ones were usually, obviously a smaller amount, maybe 300,000 to 1 point something million, depending upon the scope and the size of what it was going to do. And then the construction ones are obviously a little bit more pricey, but
Great. And I did want to highlight a question on pathways to citizenship. Could pathways to citizenship be considered under workforce development? I don't know the answer to that. I would have to consult legal. I don't know if any of you know. Yeah, I think we'd have to double check.
Yeah, I can provide some context on that question too, if it would be helpful. Just we had from the storms that hit California, pretty big impacts on the agricultural community, which rely pretty heavily on an undocumented workforce. And so then because of that, they've been ineligible for a lot of programs that could provide some assistance for them. So thinking about like long-term economic resiliency, I think if perhaps like some programs could incorporate pathways to citizenship as part of them, perhaps that could help these local economies build for that resiliency.
Yeah, thanks for the context. I can follow up. I'll follow up.
I can also bug Melinda with that question too, but she's on vacation right now.
If you're in contact with Melinda, she will she will be better suited to answer that question for sure.
Riley, I just wanted to mention one thing, building on maybe something Robin said or you said related to transportation, but it could also be, other infrastructure, which is, EDA always needs the connection back to economic development and economic recovery. There, lots of other agencies that fund infrastructure, but just thinking about kind of what's the unique angle of EDA, and how, making the connection back to economic development and economic recovery is really important. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, thank you. Simple. Yeah, then there's a question about timeline. The disaster NOFO is on a rolling basis, so there's no expiration on the deadline to apply. We'll either run out of funds or it'll get carried over into the next supplemental. And then for timelines on projects, generally construction projects are a little bit longer than non-construction. It's specific to the project you're working on, but typically no longer than 5 years for construction and 1 to 3 on non-construction. Excellent. If there aren't any other questions, we can give you all a little bit of time back. This is recorded and we'll post it to the same webpage that I posted before. It's our disaster supplemental website, and that should go up relatively soon. Our public affairs team is pretty quick. So yeah, thank you all for coming. If you do have follow-up questions, please reach out to your EDR. And as always, check the NOFO. There's a lot of details in there that can be really helpful. Any last words? Excellent. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week.